Hello, I'm R. Wesley Edwards, and I've decided to read Tyzmon, the last BladeHunter, to the YouTube audiences out there. I wrote this novel 3 years ago and released it, as it were, on Halloween in 2013. It's the first book in the Tales from Archangel Valley, which might be a series if I ever, finish anything else in my life. Anyway, so here we go. Tyzmon, the Last BladeHunter, a fantasy novel by R. Wesley Edwards. That's me. So I guess I'm also your host. We'll start with the first half, which is entitled Mysteries of the Valley. This is going to be Act 1. It says, all the players shall be brought to the stage. This introduction is a good 45 minutes long. So I hope you're driving somewhere, or, I don't know, cleaning, or, I don't know, something. You don't really need to look at me for this, since I probably won't look at you. Here we go. Introduction. Sol hung in the sky, more than halfway down, a promise of night. And to confirm it, Luna rushed ahead, acquiring the nightly hue of midnight blue. 'Twas early evening, some stars twinkling, and Venus, of course. Later, Mars would make his crimson self known, a rusty, distant light. Tyzmon took a deep breath. He was alive, and you knew he was alive. Alive. Alive and breathing. He decided to try to get a look around. The pain in his abdomen was receding to a dull throb, and he no longer felt he was nailed through his guts to the ground. How bad was the wound, he wondered. Apparently not bad enough. He was conscious. He could hear nothing, but flinched twice, bending to look, once for the pain, and once for fear that he made a loud noise and would bring an enemy to finish the job. Did he cry out in pain? He couldn't be sure. But still, nothing, no movement, no other sounds. In his own head, the surf was banging against him and carrying him partially out and back and dropping him again upon the shore to writhe in agony. But the reality was much simpler. He was barely moving, and alone in an empty field. Alone, that is, except for the bodies. Later, he'd stumble over them as he made his way out of the field, out of the past and into the present, and into a new kind of war. We may think he was dreaming. We may think he was hallucinating. We may even go so far as to think, or say we think, he was lying, and maybe he was. But the tale, so bold and full of action, demands to be repeated. And if I fail to keep your attention, if I fail to give a full account, if I fail you, dear reader, the failing is mine and mine alone, because the way these events made their way into my head so that I could relay them to you does not excuse a retelling that lacks polish and fails to keep the interest of the audience, or indeed annoys the audience and turns it against the storyteller himself, and forces a new kind of embellishment, the lie that I do not know the story at all. He could hear his own breathing. He could hear his own breathing. Now that was something. It was the first sensation after what felt like the midpoint between a kind of nauseous whirling in a giant oil-topped coffee cup and oblivion, nothingness itself, an unpleasant dream without any real shapes or sounds. As he stood, he felt better and was surprised to find there was no blood on him. He'd fallen onto a tree branch, and that, I suppose, explained the pain earlier. Still, Tyzmon opened his cloaking robe from the hidden clasp at the front and began a self-inspection for injuries which apparently ended satisfactorily. As he next closed the clasp, adjusted his clothing, and began to look around for his gear. This is a problem, because he was suddenly confused and his memory was blank. He was a child in the teachings and was raising his hand eagerly as a wizard perused the tow-hooded students, and finally settled upon the young Tyzmon, who couldn't remember what he was going to say at all, or even what the question had been. Now, Half a billion years later and a few billion steps taken on older legs, he could remember that question, but his own current circumstances evaded him, swam like shiny, dazzling fish, avoiding his grasp, but worse, even confusing his very eyes, as he tried to catch the merest glimpse of them. He straightened, blinked his eyes, and tried to get a fix on his position. "Start fresh," he said aloud. "A battlefield." It was a thought. "I am in the middle of a battlefield. I am uninjured. There are no people or animals near." Then, bewildered, he looked at his feet. He was wearing some fine boots, finished with what appeared to be fish scales. There was a shimmer about them, and in his head a similar shimmer. The branch he'd earlier blamed for his pain was a weapon of some kind. His weapon. Tyzmon bent to recover the branch, and in that moment heard what could only be construed as a human call. A shouted word or more, off in the distance. His fingertips were upon the branch, and the fish were in his hands, and he remembered all. The sounds were memories? Momentarily, he moved his fingers away from the Tyzmon staff, and the quiet returned. The muddled feeling of being lost and waking in an empty field filled with pain and confusion returned, and with it a new feeling of having abandoned, betrayed an old beloved friend, the smack of a soft woman turned hard by a careless betrayal. This branch is a part of me, thought Tyzmon. It was a little unsettling to be unmanned, as it were, by the simple act of lifting a finger from a piece of wood. To feel like a brain-damaged child taunted by older children because his uncle, his guardian, was a drunk who slunk along in the... What's this? He may have said that aloud. He wasn't touching the branch, and yet a memory surfaced. Tyzmon watched the memory unfold the way one watches puppies play on a ledge. Amusement, fascination, and, naturally, terror. A young Tiz, again, after a day in class being plagued by forgetfulness, nausea, and headaches, and the mocking of his classmates, and the confusion of an elder wizard, the scratching of head and beard. He even removed his hood temporarily and rubbed the back of his neck. "Tyzmon, you were so eager, and yet now you are so quiet," Macmillan had said. Now, outside, Tyzmon, almost in tears, remembered the look upon old Mac's face. He wasn't concerned. He'd been surprised, yes, but angry, no. Not even frustrated. Who was it that was watching puppies now? Macmillan seemed genuinely interested in Tiz's confusion. Was there a trace of amusement? The older Tyzmon in the field, bent over a branch, couldn't be sure he wasn't adding details to the old man's face. In any case, the old wizard recovered himself and continued the lesson as though nothing had happened, and did not give Tizzy another look, nor speak of it to him after class. "Dumbass," and "What the fuck is wrong with you today, you moron drama queen?" the children were saying as they scattered to the winds after class. Even though Mac and Tiz were alone in the room, the elder did not treat him in any way different than on any other day. And Tiz whispered, "I'm sorry." But Macmillan did not hear, or pretended not to hear, and Tyzmon left the room, the suite, and the building, a befuddled, fuzzy version of himself. Tyzmon heard a noise and almost stood to look, not quite pulled from his reverie. He crouched. He was inches from the branch, and the memory would continue whether he was going to watch it or not. He sat on the ground. Tyzmon was outside the schoolhouse, but was facing it. He was several meters away. Had he lifted a hand, it would have completely covered the antique icon to academia, and it would have seemed he was looking down into an empty valley. He was leaning on a tree and eating an apple, I guess. His sack was under his knees, and you or I would have thought the young Tyzmon was comfortable there. He wasn't eating the apple, though. He was staring at it. The tree, of course, was an apple tree. This apple was on the ground when he got here, and in one motion he lifted the apple, turned, dropped the sack, and sat on it, back to the tree. He let go of the apple, and a strange thing occurred. It did not fall into his lap, and then it did. First blanking in class and now hallucinating. What the fuck is wrong with me, thought Tyzmon. I remember, thought the elder Tyzmon. I remember. Long story short, the youthful, not quite pubescent Tiz climbed the tree, broke off a branch, and it was this very branch. Tyzmon placed his hand upon the branch and suddenly felt whole, suddenly felt powerful. The pain, a memory. The memories painful, filling his mind, his head like a soup cup filled with a bowl's worth of soup, threatening to spill, but then not spilling, but getting larger. The fish swam around him, and ready to take orders or just be pretty or settle for a nap in his hands. For your edification, I'll tell you this. The younger Tiz took the branch to his uncle's sister, who helped him trim, wash, braise, and finish it with oil. She marked it with the family's runes, then used a wood-burning tool to sear them, tattooing the branch forever using mint leaves and clover to avoid putting fire to the bark. It was odd, though. Mary was usually such a bitch. Odd that he'd even go to her in the first place. There was a hawk in the distance, and Tyzmon began to walk, Tyzlane's staff in hand, toward it. He could see mountains, and it was not lost on him that this battlefield was quite similar to the place where he liberated this branch, and could see the old school in the valley. With every step, though, he became stronger in mind, especially, but in body as well, and was struck with the notion that it was a beautiful day. He laughed. He even began to sing. Then he stepped over the first body and decided to, at the very least, not be too joyful. After 3 more steps, he went back to that first body and rolled it onto its side. Someone or something had removed most of this man's belongings. Tyzmon had expected to find someone such as himself, with the only imagined difference that this person had succumbed to the permanent unconsciousness. It was now that Tyzmon gave his own clothing a critical look. He seemed to be dressed, though not for war, but for, perhaps, a meeting with league acquaintances, or perhaps he was going to guide apprentices in meditation. This man, however, this body, belonged to a man who had been severely humbled, humiliated before being badly beaten and murdered. It was true. The throat had been cut. It was deliberate and would not have happened to an active, struggling man. A very thin but deep cut. Tyzmon could smell herbs in the man's mouth. There was a rustling behind him, and Tyzmon turned to look, already the master of his immediate surroundings. When he returned to the body, the distraction? Oh, a lizard under dry leaves, something like that. When he returned to the body, it was fucking breathing. A sigh and a gasp for breath, and the man sat up. It occurred to Tyzmon that this guy resembled Macmillan. A young and slightly sickly, gaunt, pale Macmillan. Don't worry, reader. It wasn't Macmillan. Tyzmon was being crazed and would have recognized his own face in a bowl of custard. The eyes were at once hard and dead. "Are you there?" said Tyzmon. And the man choked out an exhale and fell, lifeless, to the ground. Tyzmon stared at the body in disbelief and mild shock. The amusement and giddy happiness a distant memory, though, not of the fish variety. Something serious had happened, and Tyzmon didn't know what it was. Was he hallucinating? Again? Was this all some kind of drunken dream? Was he the subject of a bizarre stream of consciousness story written by an old bastard with a beautiful pen and too much ink? Tiz shook his head. He placed the staff onto the ground and began to examine the body in a less superficial way. Clues to the man's identity before he owned nothing, not even his own body. Clues to what had happened to him and who had done it. The man was breathing. Again. This time, Tyzmon did not react at all. If anything changed, he knew he had to notice it, document it, at least temporarily, in his mind. He had to know the mechanism that caused the yo-yo to go up and down, dipping into life and raising into severe disenfranchisement. "I'm fucking touching his skin," Tyzmon said aloud. Tyzmon grabbed his staff and stood, bending slightly over the body, which, breathing slow, climbed into the higher reaches of invisible trees and was dead again. What am I? But he knew damn well what he was. One doesn't go to a school taught by warlocks, witches, and wizards for the amusement of theater audiences. No. For that, you'd go to dramatics and learn by doing. Learn by portraying a child on stage, because at that age, it's the only thing you know. If I bring you to life, can you promise you won't be a mindless automaton and try to eat my brains? He said aloud, apparently to the corpse. I suppose I could just kill you, again, if I don't like what you become. I imagine at this point, Tyzmon just wanted company. Or was he acting out of morbid curiosity? He leaned his staff firmly upon the man's gut and took the face in his own hands and realized he'd done this very motion before. Perhaps many times before. Was he a necromancer? Or was he some kind of a healer? Was there a rule he couldn't be both? Somehow, even though he apparently had his memories back, he couldn't even stab at the notion of his own benevolence. Am I a man or a monster? An angel or a demon? How much power do I have? Am I a god? His thoughts continued along these lines as he watched the color return to the man's face, felt his breathing and indeed heartbeat through the staff, kind of cocked between his cheek and his shoulder, ready to hold the man down if necessary. The corpse, now not a corpse, did not move except for the signs of life. How low could this particular yo-yo go? If it would run out of string, if it would only dangle at the end of its string, the man would be alive. He'd be stable. Maybe he'd say something. Perhaps they'd walk, traveling companions, and discuss the resettlement of the... The thought was cut off. The yo-yo was now a heavy stone, and the string was taut, and the stone was spinning. But the man would not die if Tyzmon released him. And so he did. From a step and a half away, Tiz held his staff in a gesture that was protective and hopefully non-threatening. Wrapping a hand and part of an arm around it as though for support. He watched the man recover as perhaps someone may have watched him recover at the beginning of this narrative. But the man did not speak a word. Tyzmon watched and did not speak a word. This man was apparently confused and barely seemed to notice Tiz was anything other than a distant bird hearkening the sight of a rodent in the dense, dry mountain grass. The corpse arose, stood upon his own feet, and began looking about in the area where it had been lying, lifeless, decaying, only moments ago. Tyzmon became curious, tilting his head to the side, lowering his own hood to rub his neck. What are you looking for? The man, apparently suddenly aware of him, stood and half turned. Thief? Not I. Looking for a gem. Do you not want to know what happened? The gem first. If I help you, will you agree I am not a thief, as I could have just gone? Agree. Tyzmon and the man searched the area. Tyzmon didn't really know what he was looking for, and, I'm sorry to say, was mostly making a show of it, using his staff to turn over rocks and clear the dry, broken grass to the bare earth and stone beneath. Fortunately, the matter was settled when the other apparently found what he was looking for. What happened? The former corpse said, a somewhat airy voice. You were dead. You don't seem dead now. Tyzmon's voice was that of an older man, and it occurred to him that he didn't know his own benevolence, but he didn't know his own age. Now was not the time for the experiment, but it began to dawn on him that the memories were not his own, and the branch could only do so much. You have your trinket, I take it? Tiz's own disregard of the other man's treasure came as a small surprise to him. Yes, the man returned to Tyzmon with 2 strong, steady strides. Are you the father of Heart? It was a gentle way of asking if he was a necromancer. I did return you to the ground, but I believe you put your own feet beneath you. You stand and walk on your own. Your words are new to me. I do not believe you are my puppet. Does this convince you? No, but it'll have to do, the man said. The man said nothing for an embarrassing amount of time. Then he said, You know what happened here? I awoke as you have woken. I stood over there, using this humble branch for support, and thought an apple would taste especially good. I walked here overcome with joy, which was almost shattered by sadness upon the side of your body. I learned moments before you did that I could revive you, and did so. Tyzmon's tone of voice was so commanding that he felt it was he who was the puppet. He did not feel anywhere near as strong as he sounded, but, too, made no effort to sound like anything. You lie, but it is a small lie. Mostly you tell the truth. A higher pitch, speaking faster. And you think I'm magic. He emphasized the pronouns. What are you if I'm a necromancer? You may call me John. I have the wisdom. I do not mind if you lie to me. I'll empathize with your insecurities and will know the truth behind your words. I am not offended. Someone telling you to call him John in this context is not the same as giving you his name. He was preferring to stay anonymous, or perhaps he doesn't even have a name. Do you have a name? To tell the truth, he paused as though for theatrical effect. Tiz found it charming. I do not know, but I am not trying to be ironic. Yes, that is what I'll call you. Tyzmon and Ironic Truth shook hands, and the other's strength was notably different from the empty vessel Tyzmon nearly tripped over earlier. My name is Tiz. Strangers call me Tyzmon. You may call me John or nothing at all at your option. Tiz is the family name. You were correct. The staff was a gift from my aunt and a tree. When I began puberty, left school and became a magician. I do not know that anyone on the planet is as strong as me and have ceased looking. Earlier, I awoke, as I said, as if from a drink-induced slumber, ungracefully bent over my own Tizlian staff, which I, at the time, did not recognize. I was dazed, nauseated, my mind empty, blank. It may still be blank. The memories of my past, before this place, may be what the magic staff gives me and nothing more. He was quite verbose, he decided. You speak a lot. Do you enjoy the... Oh, you haven't spoken to another person. You think I am one of them. Truth stopped speaking again. The pause was becoming uncomfortable to Tiz. Like when you have to piss, but someone wants something from you, some token or proof that you won't urinate all over the walls of their mudroom. You may speak if you like, but I do not require it. Something occurred to Tyzmon, through influence of the staff? Who knows? And he whirled and knocked the other man, Ironic Truth, to the ground, his staff humming with electric energy, his cloaking robe warm and orange with licking flames. You intend to return me to my high shelf, Tiz lad? Perhaps, but then again, perhaps not. Tyzmon took his time now. He could look at the man and through him at the same time. He was wounded and perhaps could not stand on his own. Probably wouldn't. If you know all this, why don't you know I'll strike you? Why don't you know whether I intend to shelf you? That is a question, isn't it? Tyzmon's experiment had ambiguous results, so he decided it was uncool. He was deciding on how to offer the other man his hand when Ironic Truth began to fade. How badly injured are you, John, in this context? Tyzmon was using John in a submissive, almost overly polite way. Part of his decision to convince the man that he meant no further harm, because he meant no further harm. You are not a necromancer, as you yourself seem aware. You seem to have both power of the elements and of the charge from the sky, the weather. Do you feel the wind? Have you noticed the light has faded behind the clouds? Don't die on me, John. Can't you just unspool the string again? That is a question. He decided to echo the man himself as a further convincing gesture of his neutrality, possibly even benevolence toward him. I'd rather not take the risk. I'd rather not damage you in a way that permanently strains our relationship, as you are the only one here besides me, and I am not sure where we are, though I believe my preschool was once located here. The other man, who could read Tiz's thoughts, seemed calm, though not quite as calm as he'd hoped. I have no idea, Tyzmon said aloud. Take the Tizlian staff. He abruptly tossed the branch to the fallen man, who managed to catch it, rather than be crushed beneath it. Tyzmon suddenly felt far away, homesick, and remembered choosing and cutting the branch, but the memory was fading. Before it faded completely, the perspective shifted, and the branch chose him. Tyzmon, the newcomer, sat down as though on the opposite side of a cooking fire from Truth, who studied him in a way that most people would rather not be studied. Truth knew all, and his magic empathy soon brought tears to his own eyes. The man across from him assumed a look of concern and began to stand. When Tyzmon stood up, the wind in his own dizziness brought his ass back to the ground. Better to have stayed put. He was back on his seat, only now it was a sore sitting. Do not stand. You cannot see, Shadow, can you? I can see you. Half a smile snaked across ironic Truth's face. Someone with far inferior magic has done this to you. Perhaps the last effort before dying. I can remove the bandage. Possibly the curse as well. But... he said, I can remove the damage, possibly the curse as well, but... Master. But do not stand. I am not your master. Elder Macmillan? Yes, you thought I was he when you first saw me. It is impossible. We are far away from there, far away in time. I mean, I see in your mind this valley when you were a student, and there have been changes that take eons. Master, what has happened to me? Why did I forget my answers? Why don't I remember my life? What was the question? Echoes of prepubescent schoolchildren laughing filled his benumbed, besotted head. His mind was again filled with shadows. Your name is Shadow. You are the last knife hunter, or anyway, you were before old Mac decided to make you into the most powerful magician alive. You should keep your staff. Your aunt put all of her love for you into it, that it would keep you out of trouble. People had plans for you, and you were unaware. It'd be amusing if it wasn't so tragic. Do you even know how long ago that must have been? Tyzmon is your uncle's name, or more accurately, Tiz is the family name of those who adopted you. Your uncle had been damaged, it appears, and was permanently a child. Now you have crossed the ages to revive me and seek your answers. Move your head, if you can understand, Shadow. Why do you call me Shadow? Tyzmon said as he nodded his head. I want you to carefully crawl over here and take your branch. Yes, this thing I'm holding out to you. It will ground you. You'll be happier and, frankly, less dangerous. No one has ever called me Shadow. You are the only one. I am unique in a lot of things. I have died here, but it wasn't months. It wasn't moments or days before you found me. Do you not see? Tyzmon suddenly noticed the claw marks upon the dirt, other markings made from a stick. The other man's clothes, what there were of them, were tattered, yes, but they were also smeared with dirt. One of the fish that he couldn't catch was in a broken, incomplete skeleton at the bottom of a hole that he himself had dug. I dug you out of the ground? You will not remember. You will only have to believe what you see with your eyes. Truth was at this time gingerly touching the long, gnarled tree branch in his arms. He stopped when he noticed the strange green, scorched carvings. He traced them, hovering a finger several centimeters in the air above them. Then he nodded, apparently making a decision, and traced a line of them. Then he nodded, apparently making a decision, and traced a line of markings that were not there, above and below those that were. What are you doing, Master? I am not your master, Shadow. I'm not sure anyone could be your master. To say so would be to claim to be the power that is puppeteer of the skies, eager engineer of earthquakes, chief chef of nature itself. And after a pause that seemed to last for hours, he began to actually rub the branch. That seemed to last... then vigorously, and then to cut into it with his fingertips, which were in fact finger bones, and presumably as hard. Suddenly, not 4, but 9 runes were upon the branch, and it was returned to Tyzmon, who had, by this time, taken Truth's advice, and more squirmed than crawled over to take it. Why did you call me Shadow, Truth? Tyzmon said when he had returned to himself. He stood up. over a long dead corpse still partially buried in the rock-hard ground. The skeleton said nothing. Taking the Tyzmon staff in both hands, Tyzmon held it above the skull. Sparks began to come from the sky. The ground rumbled beneath him. A gust of wind almost took Tiz off his feet. Then the rain. The runes began to glow. Truth's additions changed color, but Tyzmon's ants kept their leafy green. The ground which trapped the skeleton began to succumb to the rain, and soon Tyzmon was standing ankle-deep in water. He held the staff in ever stronger, more determined hands, lifting it above a skeleton he could only barely see. A moment later, he was sitting on the ground, Tyzmon's staff across his lap, burning fire close enough he could kick it. A well-dressed man of gaunt features stood on the other side of the fire, tending it. "You are awake, I see," assessed the fireman. "You called me Shadow," complained Tyzmon. "If I did, it was because you were in a place where you only awkwardly fit. You cannot be fully there, but as long as you try, you cannot be fully here either. I assume you decided to take me off the shelf after all this time, my brother." "Are you my brother?" Tyzmon suddenly recognized himself again and uttered involuntarily, "Macmillan was my father." "But why was I adopted by Tyzmon and his sister?" "Come, man, I cannot read your mind. I can only see that you have something you wish to say." The fireman stood, turned to face Tyzmon squarely. "You are a fireman." "Yes, and you, brother, would know this from when we were tadpoles. If the fire burned your face and left me unscathed, and then, confusingly, our mother's dying blood has touched you, but not I. Have you asked yourself why you know what you look like, yet everything else is new? The branch, the Tyzmon staff, it is a vessel for memories, for the forgetting. It has been charmed. Yes, by your aunt, actually our neighbor." There was a long pause as the fireman tended to the fire. Tyzmon closed his eyes and tried in vain to recall. "Don't worry about remembering," his brother called past the fire. "Pretend this. Pretend you were placed in a basket and floated down a river in your infancy. Our mother accused me of your murder, and our distant neighbors found you. However, later, realizing what had happened, they approached our father at his work, our school. He advised them to adopt you and say nothing. Our mother had already been made to forget. These neighbors lived far enough away that you were lost and she never found you. After your aunt magicked this branch, or more accurately, after you were brought to your aunt by this living branch, she imbued it with everything she knew as an offering to nature, and sent you to your mother out of fear of what you'd become to her if you learned the truth through the staff." Tyzmon opened his eyes when the other was quiet. He watched the man poke at the fire like an amused child. "You do love the flames, don't you, brother?" "I'm sorry for what I did to you. The basket story isn't a story except you tell it as such. It is myth based on your own actions. You're the only one I've ever told, and this because you are involved, and because, I suppose, you deserve to know the truth. And because I can kill you. You wouldn't want to kill me after you worked so hard to take me off the high shelf. How did you find me anyway?" "I returned to the valley, that is all I can say. And that is a guess, a half guess. Perhaps I'm reconstructing my memories as our teacher, your father, once told us we do. He was our father, your arcane knowledge a gift from him, and guilty reward for what we did to you. He did not make you what you are, but it was the first step. You can never take these stairs to your own permanent unconsciousness." He sighed, then continued, "You shall never sleep upstairs." "I cannot die?" "More accurate it is to say, you will not die. Tell me, brother, how many times do you think we've had this conversation?" "We've had this conversation before?" Think, man, it has been hundreds of millions of fucking years. Look at the wear up on these mountaintops. When we were saplings, these were young mountains. This was a new valley. You come here, you dig my old broken ass up. We have this conversation. You say, huh? And you leave through that pass, and yes, what will you do? I do the same thing every time. I scorch the earth, dig a foundation, build a hut where I live for years and years. Sometimes other people happen by and we have our little dramas. Or we have no drama, just conversation and ale, and I spend most of the time alone. Eventually, I am frail. I cannot feed myself, and I die. Usually by a fire. Most times by a fire. A fire I made myself. One like this. Only usually within a fireplace with a mantle. And on that mantle... The fireman's voice rose to a shout, but there was music there. On that mantle is a drawing of the runes carved into your staff, and a wood burning of you, your face, which resembles my face enough that it likely passes for a rough self-portrait in the minds of any visitors I may have. I just leave you here? Sometimes I ask, sometimes I beg even, for you to take me with you. The first few times I refused to go with you, but you did offer. Now you refuse me. Now you refuse me every time. And I'll tell you why, if you want to know. You leave me here so you may return and revive me, so we can replay this little fucking drama when you forget yourself, because you have always been a fucking twit where your penis is involved, and the witches like to suck your memories out with the gasping, enthralled breaths that accompany your damned orgasms. What? Yes, you, a man who's more powerful than the gods of the savages who think themselves so civilized, but are savages nonetheless for no other reason than their childish belief in those gods. You succumb to the charms of women who turn out to be witches, or at least when you bitch to me about it, you call them witches, and you leave me here in this little bookmarked valley to live as a perpetual hermit until you need me. It is my penance for one day, long, long ago, putting your little fucking pink body into a basket. It is my lot in life for betraying you out of jealousy. You may as well call me envy. I call you truth. It is irony for you to call me that, and by now you know it. He turned away from Tyzmon. When he turned back, his face had regained its calm, its amusement. But I am not as angry as I sound. I'm happy that you have returned, my brother, and I'm glad to see you. I suppose it's good you can't catch syphilis or whatever from your whores, so that I can see you again and we can hang out and discuss life, mostly yours, by this fire. What is your real name? Tiz? You don't even remember my name? What did I call you at school? Yeah, we didn't even go to school together. I was much older than you. I was 7 when I placed you in that basket. You were days? Months, maybe? But you were quite young. You didn't know me in school. I would have studied in solitude on one of the higher floors. I would have long forgotten what I had done to you. What is your name? My name is John. I'm serious. The fireman seemed as though he could barely stand, and in fact leaned and sat himself. A noise like sobbing came to Tyzmon from the other side of the fire. The other man was crying. All his anger, in fact, all his amusement and surprise was whipped up and then reduced as in a pot above a flame, and everything was boiled off, leaving some new, raw sorrow. Is this part of the drama we enact, brother? No, these things are different. You're not going to just leave me here this time, are you? As you say, you are the older brother. I do not think I can tell you where you can and cannot go. Tyzmon allowed his voice to resume its deeper bellow. My name is Icon, his brother sobbed. Like a small picture? It is the only answer to the question. Perhaps the language has changed on the other side of these mountains, but our parents called me Icon. Do you remember? Tyzmon thought of knocking the dead man to the ground, what felt like only a few minutes ago. Did we fight? I swung the staff at your legs. No, you dug me up. I assume you used rain and earthquakes to crack the ground, either to find me or to retrieve me, or perhaps a little of both for both. How do I know you're not a dream? Me? His brother laughed. How do I know you're not a dream? How much of this is reality and how much of it am I to weave from loose strands of memory later? Icon looked up, tears catching firelight on his cheeks. Something has changed, Tiz? I am certainly not the right person to ask. Naturally, or perhaps unnaturally, he winked. Okay, I'll continue tending the fire. You just hug your little friend there. I'll get some food and make a knife for you. I see you no longer have yours. Take a nap. Do some thinking. Don't worry about me. I'm used to being alone. Thoughtfully then, if you think of anything to tell me, it's not like I'm going anywhere. Later, and Tiz may even have dozed off, the moon was alone in the sky. Pinpricks twinkled, one of them sparkly crimson, called Mars. The rest, most of the rest anyway, stars. Icon returned. He carried several small charred bird carcasses. Tyzmon realized he was hungry. Then, he wasn't. May I have one? Tiz's voice changed tone as though he'd aged in the middle of the request. You may, but I'll toss it to you. I have no mind to consume live quail. The brother laughed, but his face was serious. You've done this before, Icon? Attempted to feed you? Yes, of course. Tyzmon caught a shiny, dark rock tossed from the other side of the fire. He only saw a flicker of firelight upon a roasted bird before the thing moved suddenly, turned its head, opened and flapped its wings, and took to the air with a squawk. I told you that would happen, said Icon, going about his business, and out of sight on the other side of the flames. How am I to eat? Maybe you're a vegetarian, my brother. I am not a vegetarian, fireman. Perhaps it best to become one. Icon smiled. One could hear it in his voice. Come, Tyzmon, focus. Tell me that you still feel hungry. Before I asked, I no longer felt hungry. I thought it was, I don't know, I thought I was hungry. I'm confused. That will pass, said the brother. Or perhaps it won't, but it always has before. There was a rustling off in the distance. Icon turned to listen, and Tyzmon began to stand, but was motioned to motionlessness by his brother. Listen, he said. Tyzmon listened and heard footsteps approaching, slow, possibly confused, unsteady footsteps. Have you seen anyone else in this valley? Icon was mouthing the words. Just... Tyzmon was confused again, and as he was about to answer, a figure stepped into view. Firelight and shadows animated his face. A soldier. He spoke aloud. Tyzmon felt his legs wobble and his head spun. He felt his face strike dirt and rocks. As he lost consciousness, he heard muffled voices. Helloa! Icon called and waved to the newcomer. Come, join our little family reunion. He opened his arms wide in a gesture of welcoming benevolence. The other took another step, then two, and was in clear view. It was the soldier Tyzmon went back for. Icon naturally could not have recognized him. What could Icon have to fear anyway? Possibly he would have welcomed a marauder, a vampire, or the devil himself to dine this night. This man here, on the ground, the soldier indicated Tyzmon's pathetic husk. Is he a necromancer? He is my brother, Icon said, as if that answered anything. Things don't die, or stay dead around him, if this is what you mean. He helped me earlier. I'm sorry to interrupt. If I could just have some water? Please have a seat. I'll see what I can do. The newcomer tilted his head slightly. Why are you nude? Oh, that could be a long story. You know part of it already. Our mutual friend found me and revived me. I fear my clothing has rotted long ago. If you are offended, I apologize. When I find your water, perhaps I'll find something to wear. The soldier said nothing. He did sit. He chose a place close to Tyzmon and began to examine him. Icon disappeared from view as he walked away from the fire. Tyzmon's body shook, his eyes flickered, and he retched, heaved. His eyes snapped open, then glazed over and blinked shut again. His body convulsing, legs straightening, arms flailing. If you can hear me, your brother is having some kind of seizure, the soldier called in the direction Icon had gone. There were several seconds of spasms, but finally, Tyzmon's body ceased movement and appeared inert again. I wonder if I can help you, the soldier said. Voices swirled in the air around his head and clung to his face. And Tyzmon was conscious again. He opened his eyes and felt warmth upon his cheek and forehead. Someone familiar was touching his face. Water was splashed onto his lips. He blinked several times, and the blur slowly focused to his brother, Icon, and a strange man wearing rags. They were discussing something. Tyzmon couldn't decipher what. They were tending to him. "I think I'm okay now," Tyzmon said, sitting up. "What happened?" The other two glanced at each other momentarily. Then Icon said, "You had a seizure. I've never seen this before, Tiz. Your body has never seemed unfit. However strange your behavior." "Am I dying, do you think?" "You? I doubt it. I've seen things. I don't think you can die. But perhaps you are still under whatever sorcery brought you back to this valley in the first place." He paused, then continued, "Not that I'm not happy to see you, of course." Tyzmon nodded, then focused on the other man. "I recognize you." His voice airy, this possibly a question, possibly a statement of fact. The soldier's voice was solemn, a tree in a marsh. "You revived me, I believe, this afternoon." "Oh yes, truth." "I am telling you facts as I know them." The soldier wasn't privy to Tyzmon's hallucinations from a few hours earlier. "Only we have this honor." "I mean your name. Your name is Truth." Tyzmon's mind completely closed off to the possibility that his daydreams are so realistic that he cannot tell them from reality. "No, my name is Raydolf." He paused between the syllables. Raydolf. The man suddenly became animated and blurted, "Earlier, you helped me find an heirloom, and then you began wandering. I thought you were chanting something and left you alone. I couldn't find water, and becoming desperate, I tracked you here. I didn't mean to intrude, but I was very thirsty. Your brother here," he glanced over, "has brought me some meat and water. If I can help you, either of you, I will do so." He caught his breath, returned his focus to Tyzmon. "I began to think the whole thing was a dream, but I too stepped over bodies, and then the sun went down. I heard coyotes or wolves howling. Then I heard what I thought were distant voices. Then saw this fire. Thank you. And thank you again for helping me." Icon and Tyzmon stared at Ralph in disbelief. Icon spoke for them both. "You are welcome as long as you wish. Other than answers, we require very little from you. If you don't mind answering questions." Radolf was still focused on Tyzmon, who shrugged slightly and nodded agreement with his brother. "It occurs to me," Radolf started, and paused, then continued, "that if I'm dead, there is nowhere I need to be." He was quiet again, like 20 seconds. "But I'm a little confused myself." "Alright, well, maybe it worked this time. It was take 4 or 5, I don't even keep track anymore. Alright, well, if you want to buy it, I'll put the link to the book and the Kindle version and part 1 below. That's 3 different links, but it's one book. And maybe you can buy it and read along with me, or you can buy it and make this channel as obsolete as it really the hell is. Well, 48 minutes.